The well in the Holloway Hotel did not keep water. It kept what the town could not bury. People said it was only a service shaft of stone laid by hired masons, a practical thing where the mountain bled cold and clear. But if you stood over its mouth and listened the way the old-timers did, hat off, breath held, you heard a draft that did not sound like wind and a depth that did not sound like earth. June of 1900 came in wet. The Ozark ridges were a green so dense it felt like velvet, and the hollers steamed after every noon storm. Travelers climbed the switchbacks with mules and motor cars alike, lured by a rumor, a grand retreat of polished wood and civilized music in a country that still smelled of chert and foxfire. The Holloway rose from the shoulder of a limestone knuckle, a three-story hotel with a bell tower, a wraparound veranda, and a row of rocking chairs painted the cream of sweet milk. Kerosene lamps glowed along the galleries at dusk, and a new Edison phonograph clicked and sighed in the parlor as if the machine were learning to breathe. Nathaniel Holloway liked to be seen on the veranda at sundown, thumbs hooked in his vest, watch chain cutting a small crescent of light when he shifted. His wife, Eleanor, floated through the dining room like a hymn, smiling at bankers from Springfield and ladies in traveling hats who asked whether the springs were really medicinal. Local men, carpenters turned bellmen, loggers turned porters, had work here now. Silas Boone ran luggage with a soldier's back. Ruthie May ironed collars so crisp they made the guests sit straighter. Even the preacher nodded approval when he passed, though he did not like the way the phonograph made cylinders of waltz spill out into a valley that had only ever known fiddle tunes. On the first Sunday after the circus train threaded the lower valley, a young woman stepped down from the stagecoach with a carpet bag and a parasol that had seen a better year. She wrote Lila Hart, St. Louis, in the register with a careful hand and a small pause before the city, as if measuring how far she meant to be from it. Her dress was traveling black. Her voice, when she asked for a quiet room and a view, held a cathedral hush. Mr. Holloway put her in 213, a corner chamber that took the west light and made the walnut bedposts glow like brandy. From the veranda, the locals noticed her once and then pretended they had not. Lila walked the grounds in the cool mornings, tracing the path down to the Stone Spring house and back, always polite, always alone. In the parlor, she laid one gloved hand on the phonograph table, as if steadying a nervous animal, then asked the clerk whether the machine knew any hymns. At supper, she ate like a bird and listened like a witness. The only time she let laughter reach her eyes was when Silas told a story about a mule that refused to cross a bridge until it had been blessed, and even then her laughter came out of her as if it surprised her on the way. It was the storm on Thursday that taught the Holloway how the mountain sounded when it did not approve. The afternoon heat rose until the timberline flickered. Then the wind leaned down from the ridge and pressed its thumb on the hotel roof. Chickens at the staff cottages flattened themselves under the rain barrel. The bell tower groaned once, twice. At the front desk, Miss Fairchild slid the register into the drawer and set the brass key tray on top of it like a paperweight against the weather. By dusk, the road had turned to clay, the wheels of the last carriage sketching fishbones of ruts that filled and vanished under the sudden pour. Nathaniel walked the halls with a lantern, telling guests not to worry. He had seen worse, which was true only in that he had a talent for remembering nothing unpleasant in detail. Downstairs, Ruthie May banked the kitchen fires. Silas checked the cellar windows one by one, tapping each iron latch, counting out loud because numbers made sense when weather did not. The cellar was where the mountain met the hotel and had an opinion about it. Barrels of flour and apples sat under canvas. The stone well sat in the far corner, an older circle of masonry than the hotel had any right to claim. The rope wheel above it was oiled and quiet. If you put your palm on the stone, you felt a cold that did not belong to July. At 9, lightning cupped the valley in a white hand and showed the veranda empty. At 10, the phonograph went mute mid-song, the cylinder ticking like a cricket that had forgotten its part. At 11, a door somewhere upstairs shut with a careful click, the kind of sound a person makes when they mean to be considerate. The storm had made everyone hear things. Shortly after midnight, Silas saw Lila in the west corridor, her parasol folded under her arm like a field officer's baton. She had changed into a dress the color of wet ash and put her hair up in a way that made her look ready to travel. "You all right, miss?" he asked, because the air around her felt like a decision. "I am," she said, and the thunder took the rest of it. She smiled to make the answer true. "Only, the storm keeps me wakeful. I thought a turn would cure it." "If you want company on the stairs, these steps can be mean when they're damp," he offered. "I won't go far," she said. It sounded like a promise to herself, not to him. He watched her walk to the landing and then forced himself not to mother a woman who had written St. Louis as an address she could not afford. 20 minutes later, the rain slackened as if the sky had run out of spite. The lamps in the corridor fluttered, gulped, steadied. Silas started his second round and found the east stair dry, the south stair drooping, the back stair, down to the service hall, holding footprints that did not belong to him. A woman's, fine-soled, a neat oval heel. They went down. He adjusted his lantern wick and followed, not because he had a story in his head yet, but because something in his ribs told him to. The cellar smelled of damp canvas and cut apple and a thread of iron that lived in the well stones. He lifted the lantern and called, "Miss?" He did not say her name. Saying a stranger's name underground felt like spending money you hadn't counted. He moved past the flour barrels, past the stacked crates of enamel wash basins, to the far corner where the well sat with its rope coiled like a sleeping thing. The footprints ended 3 boards shy of the circle. There the wood showed a brief scuff, a turn, as if the owner had hesitated and then stepped closer. He raised the lantern higher and leaned over the lip. The light fell and fell, swallowing its own yellow as it went. The draft rose to meet him, cold in a way that ignored weather, steady in a way that did not care about storms. From the black below came the smallest sound, not splash, not echo, something like a breath drawn through teeth. Silas jerked back so abruptly the lantern chimed against the stone. For a moment he stood with his palm flat against his own chest, as if his heart had tried to go somewhere without him. He looked around for the bucket and found none. The crank stood locked with the rope pinned, as it always was. He told himself that the sound might be water shifting in a side shaft, that the footprints might belong to Ruthie May or Miss Fairchild earlier in the day. He told himself anything a reasonable man would say when the mountain asked him a question he did not want to answer. On the table by the steps lay a small thing that had not been there at supper. A parasol strap, thin as a vein, broken at the clasp. He held it in the lantern light and felt the stitchwork. Then he folded it into his palm and went upstairs, not running, not yet. In the hall where the lamps made islands of brightness, he looked at 213. The door stood ajar the width of a banknote. He knocked softly and heard nothing that belonged in a room. By morning, the mountain air had scrubbed the sky and the ridges sat clean and new as if carved during the night. Miss Fairchild rang the breakfast bell, the preacher walked by and tipped his hat. Nathaniel Holloway said to Eleanor that storms always made the valley sleep deeper, that the guests would be down slow. At the desk, the brass tray of keys sat in its neat little fleet. One space was empty. The tag for 213 did not come home.
Whispers are the currency of mountain towns, and after Lila Hart's disappearance, Holloway's registers carried more silence than names. The rainwater dried from the verandas, but not from the gossip that spread in kitchens and barber chairs. Folks said she left on her own, some man come to fetch her in the storm. Others swore they heard a carriage wheel on the back road at midnight, though the mud that week would have swallowed any wheel to its hub. A few mentioned the well in tones hushed dischurch prayer, an old shaft dug before the hotel, older than the Holloway family itself. They said the water wasn't water at all, not anymore, just blackness waiting for the unwary. Inside the hotel, staff carried their own suspicions like extra weight on their backs. Ruthie May noticed that Eleanor Holloway began locking the linen closets, though nothing worth stealing lay folded on the shelves. Silas was told to leave the cellar unlit after sunset, as if lamps offended something down there. Miss Fairchild, pale from long nights, whispered to a colleague that certain rooms, 213 among them, were now struck from the ledger. She had been ordered to skip numbers when assigning chambers, a detail she found harder to explain with each passing day. Nathaniel Holloway, always neat in his vest and cuffs, brushed aside concerns. "Travelers are fickle," he said when asked about vanished guests. "The mountains change a man's mind overnight." He smiled as he said it, but his eyes darted toward the cellar door whenever thunder rolled. His wife played the hostess still, yet her smile stiffened at the mention of storms, and her hands fluttered at her sides like birds searching for escape. By late summer, a stranger arrived with ink-stained fingers and a trunk that clicked with brass clasps. His name was Charles Merrick, a journalist from Kansas City, traveling under the guise of seeking rest in mountain air. He had the look of a man who pretended to relax, only to study more closely. In the dining room, he asked questions too casual to be innocent. Where did the water for the hotel come from? Why were certain hallways so quiet? Who had last stayed in the west corner rooms? Locals eyed him with both hope and caution. Old Mrs. Dobbins, who sold eggs at the roadside, told him about the Holloway Hollow, the valley where the hotel stood. She said that place was cursed ground. My granddaddy said the Shawnee wouldn't camp there, not even for a night. Said there was a hole in the earth, and what came out of it was no spring. Merrick noted it down in his ledger, careful to record each syllable. Later, in the barber shop, he heard another story. A traveling salesman had checked into the hotel 3 months prior and never checked out. His sample still sat in the back of a general store, unclaimed. A girl delivering laundry whispered that she had seen men carry something long and heavy down to the cellar under the cover of a thunderclap. She swore she heard water splash, though no bucket had been lowered. At first, Merrick suspected exaggeration born of boredom, but then he saw for himself the well in the hotel's bowels. The excuse was simple. He claimed to be interested in architecture, in how the stone foundation met the mountain. Silas, against better judgment, guided him down the service stairs with a lantern. The smell grew stronger with each step, not rot, not mold, but something metallic and sour, like old blood left too long in air. The well crouched in the corner, its stones darker than the rest, the rope wheel silent but tense, as if it remembered motion. Merrick leaned over and felt the draft rise up, steady, cold, unnatural. He struck a match and let it fall. They both watched as the flame shrank, fluttered, and vanished before it touched bottom. "That's no spring," Merrick muttered, scribbling in his ledger even as the hair lifted on his neck. Silas said nothing. He only set the lantern down and made the sign of the cross, a habit he had long abandoned except in the cellar of the Holloway Hotel. Above them, a door creaked shut, though neither had touched it. The well breathed again.
Merrick pretended not to hurry the next morning. He sat through eggs and ham as if a man could fill himself against unease, then asked to see the spring house, to admire the stonework, to photograph the veranda. He took his notes in a compact ledger, left-handed, the nib clicking quietly. When he finally asked Silas for another look below, for a sketch of the foundation, you understand, it was noon, and the hotel hummed with the relief of clear weather. They went down alone. The cellar had been aired, the metallic thread in the smell was fainter but present. Merrick crouched by the well and traced a fingertip along the outer stones. "These aren't the same cut as the foundation," he said. "Different mason's hand, and older. See how the joints breathe a little." In the lantern's light, the stones showed shallow scoring, not letters, not numbers, but a sequence of short horizontal marks set in clusters, 5 and a slash, 5 and a slash, like tallies someone kept and then lost courage to finish. Silas pretended not to see them. "Folks said an old place stood here before the hotel," he offered. "Maybe a trading post, maybe worse." "Worse?" asked Merrick, and when Silas did not answer, he peered over the lip again. "How deep?" "Too deep for a bucket," Silas said. "Mr. Holloway had it capped after the pump was put in, but the cap never sat right. You put a hand on it and you feel wind, only it ain't wind." Merrick lowered a line with a small brass weight he used for river work, counting under his breath. Twice the line went slack where it should not, as if it had brushed an edge that wasn't stone. He retrieved it and found the brass cold enough to hurt his fingers. "There's a side chamber, and something metallic down there. Could be old tools." "Could be," Silas said, and set the lantern back where the shadow of the crank would not fall across the circle. In town that afternoon, Merrick's questions were met with the mountain art of half-answers. The general storekeeper remembered the salesman by the neat stack of sample cases he'd left, each tied with cord and tagged with a careful hand. He was particular, the man said. Paid for a week, never came for a refund. In the post office, a ledger showed letters addressed in a woman's measured script to Miss L. Hart, Poste Restante, St. Louis, uncollected. At the livery, the stable hand swore no carriage had come or gone at midnight in that storm. The clay would have told on him if he lied. Near dusk, Merrick found Reverend Josiah Ames walking the shoulder of the road with his hat off to the breeze. The preacher had the long, patient face of a man used to slow confessions. "You're staying up at the Holloway," he said without greeting, as if he were reciting a verse. "I am," Merrick said, "and I've heard talk of an older well." Ames studied him. "Talk is a crop that grows without seed, but there is a hole in that cellar and a mouth on it. I've prayed over it every spring since the hotel opened, not because I believe a prayer can plug rock, but because men can. Men with money can plug a lot." "What happened before the hotel?" "My father wouldn't camp on that bench, said the Shawnee left it alone, said other folks didn't. He scraped his boot along the gravel and made a clean line. You say you're a man of newspapers, then print this much truth for yourself. There were people gone from these hills long before a phonograph started sighing in that parlor. But a tune can make you forget a body, and a job can make you not see a footprint." "Do you advise me to stop?" "I advise you to know what will be asked of you if you don't," Ames said, and put his hat back on. 2 days later, the laundry cart came back from the hotel with an inventory short by 1 bundle. Ruthie May counted twice, then a third time, lips moving. She went looking for Mary Caldwell, a girl of 17 with wrists like willow switches, who had run linens down to the cellar to dry on ropes in the storm air. Mary had left the cart in the service hall and stepped below with a basket rope over her shoulder. She did not come back up in time for supper. No one said the word missing until dawn, when her mother arrived at the staff door in shoes that did not match. Nathan Holloway said there would be no alarm. He said Mary had a sweetheart and likely a plan. He did not say why the night porter had found the service door to the cellar standing open to the cool draft at 2 in the morning. He did not say why 1 rope on the drying line had been pulled down and knotted hard enough to glaze the fibers. He ordered the cellar locked and the key kept at the desk. He placed a notice in the Springfield paper asking Mary to write home if she had left in haste, and he signed it with a flourish. Merrick wrote all of it in his ledger and sharpened his pencil until the shavings curled like shells.
He visited Mary's mother, who sat at the foot of a bed that did not look sat upon otherwise, hands wrapped around a teacup that had gone cold. Mary would never leave without telling me. She was afraid of the dark part of that hotel, said the lamps didn't bite there, said the light was thin. When Merrick returned to the Holloway, the pleasant mask of the place had slipped, the kitchen too quiet, the bell too slow to ring. Eleanor Holloway asked whether perhaps the gentleman had finished resting in mountain air and would he be settling his bill. Her voice was smooth, but her fingers worried a handkerchief so hard the threads lifted. That night, Merrick went down alone. He had bribed the night porter with a month's wages and a promise to put no name in print until he had one he could defend. In the cellar, the lamp's blue breath showed dust that had been disturbed and then made neat with a broom. On the table by the steps, his brass weight lay where he had not left it, wiped and warm to the touch as if handled by a careful hand. He set the lamp far from the rim and saw, in the mortar of the third course from the lip, something he had missed, a ring of symbols cut shallow and tight to the stone, circles within circles, joined by short strokes like spokes on a wheel. Not letters, not any tally a man might keep, marks old enough that lime had softened them, and new enough that someone had traced them with a nail to make them sharper. He bent lower. The draught rose, colder now, steady as breath. He spoke without meaning to, the way one speaks to a door before opening it. "How far do you go?" The well answered, as it always did, in silence that wasn't. Upstairs, a board flexed and settled. Footsteps crossed a line of floor where no one had any business at that hour. Merrick set his jaw, tied the weight to his line, and let it slip into the circle. He counted. 50 feet. 70. A brush against something that gave. Cloth? He drew it back. At the end of the line clung a strip of fabric, pale and fine, hem-stitched with the kind of care a mother teaches a daughter. He set it in the lamp's light and saw the tiniest pricked initials in one corner. M.C. He folded the scrap into his notebook and closed the cover as if that could keep anything safe. Then he turned the lamp down until the cellar was an outline and stood with both hands on the stone as if bracing for a blow that hadn't landed yet. The draught rose, colder still. Somewhere above, a door clicked and a key turned like a prayer said backwards.
The Holloway Hotel tried to breathe like nothing had changed. Lamps glowed warm, brass railings shone, and the piano in the parlor clinked its cheerful waltzes. But beneath the polish, the building groaned with strain. Guests whispered about empty tables at supper. Staff moved with slower feet, glancing at the cellar door as if it might exhale. Nathaniel Holloway ordered everyone to speak nothing, see nothing. He paid 3 months' wages in a single afternoon to Ruthie May and Miss Fairchild, each handed a purse heavy enough to silence questions. A kindness for your loyalty, he called it, but his eyes had the hardness of a locked door. Money rolled wider than the staff. Sheriff Danvers came for supper 2 nights later, ate his pork roast in Eleanor's private dining room, and left with an envelope tucked in his coat. When townsfolk asked about Mary Caldwell, he muttered about runaways and restless girls, then tipped his hat, as if courtesy could erase a body. The Springfield paper printed a notice blaming the weather for missed connections, then stopped printing about the Holloway altogether. The town breathed shallow because everyone knew the hotel brought business, and business was oxygen. Yet rumors did not stay bought. In the barber shop, someone whispered of chanting it might. In the market, someone swore they saw black-robed figures crossing the lawn with lanterns that burned blue. The preacher's warnings grew sharper, his sermons filling with talk of wells that swallowed more than water. A few families stopped sending daughters to work up at the hotel.
but many stayed because wages fed hungry mouths, and fear was a luxury the poor could not afford. Charles Merrick wrote by candlelight in a rented room in town. His notes spread across the table like a map of rot. Names, dates, vanishings, receipts of guests who never checked out. In the margin, he wrote one word again and again: well. When a rock shattered his window one night with a note tied to it, "Leave or be left," he folded the glass shards into an envelope as evidence. His hands shook, but his resolve only deepened. He knew he had reached the marrow of the story. He also knew stories could bury the men who wrote them. On the 7th night, when the storm broke again, Merrick carried his lamp and his ledger down to the cellar. He had bribed the porter again, but this time no one followed. The air was thicker now, the draught colder. Dust lay carefully swept, as though someone wanted to erase traffic. The well waited, its stones darker, its marks sharper, as if fresh fingers had retraced them. He tied his weight to the rope and lowered it. 70 feet, 90. Then a hollow clang, metal against metal. He pulled it up, breath ragged, and saw fragments hooked on the weight. Rusted iron, a hinge or shackle. His hand shook as he laid it on the table. He lowered again, and this time something softer came back. Leather strips, brittle with age, cut in a shape that could only have bound wrists. He stared until his vision blurred. But what made him step closer was not what came up. It was what drifted into the lamplight below. At first he thought it was wood. Then the shapes resolved into ribs, a jaw, a hand with fingers curled as if still reaching, bones stacked like kindling in the black throat of the earth. Some wrapped in cloth so ancient it frayed into mist. Others marked with scorings, cuts, deliberate, ritual. Above them lay objects, a crude idol carved of limestone, a blade blackened not by rust, but by something burned into its surface. His breath caught. He felt he was staring into the stomach of a god that demanded more than faith. The draught swelled, carrying a smell that clawed the throat. The lamp guttered. From somewhere above, a board creaked. Footsteps crossed, heavy, deliberate. Merrick spun, notebook clutched to his chest. Nathaniel Holloway stood at the bottom of the stairs, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. Behind him, 2 men from town, the sheriff and the porter, filled the space like shadows called to heel. "You've seen too much," Holloway said, voice steady as iron. "This hotel feeds families. It keeps this valley alive. You think the world needs your words more than this place needs silence?" Merrick tried to steady his own voice. "There are bodies down there. Rituals. You can't cover this with envelopes and dinners." Holloway's smile was thin. "History forgets what we tell it to forget, and you, sir, will not be remembered." The men moved closer. The lamp in Merrick's hand flickered, throwing long shadows across the stone. Behind him, the well breathed, cold and patient, as if eager to receive again.
The pistol's hammer clicked back, a small sound swallowed by the cellar's draft. Merrick stood his ground, notebook clutched so tight a leather cover creaked. Behind Holloway, Sheriff Danvers shifted uneasily, as though even bribery could not shield him from what lay in the well. The other man, the porter Merrick had once trusted, wouldn't meet his eyes. Fear has many faces, and Merrick saw them all. "I'll publish it," Merrick said, his voice sharp but shaking. "People will know. They'll come here with torches, and you won't bury this anymore." Holloway's lantern swung, throwing jagged light over the cellar walls. The stones seemed to sweat. "You think words can fight stone and silence?" His voice softened, almost fatherly. "The world needs stories that comfort, not those that tear apart foundations." Danvers stepped forward. "Enough talking." The porter grabbed Merrick's wrist, wrenching the notebook free. Holloway opened it, scanning the pages of names, dates, and sketches of symbols. He nodded once, then fed it to the lantern's flame. The paper curled black, then collapsed into ash that drifted toward the well, as if drawn by a breath. Merrick lunged, but Danvers pinned him with the barrel of his rifle. Holloway shook his head. "You should have left when warned." The draft surged colder, as if the well approved. They bound Merrick with rope, wrists raw against the coarse fibers. The cellar seemed smaller, the shadows heavier. He struggled, but 3 men outweighed 1. The last thing he saw before the gag cut his voice was the sheriff's eyes, guilty, resigned, but unmoving. When dawn came, no guests noticed the absence of the inquisitive journalist. A telegram was typed and sent. Charles Merrick departed suddenly on urgent business. His trunk disappeared into the Holloway's storage. His name never reached the papers again. But the hotel was no longer safe. Whispers spread faster than Holloway's bribes. Guests left abruptly, carriages rolling down the mountain road without explanation. The phonograph in the parlor played to empty chairs. Ruthie May quit without collecting her wages. Miss Fairchild left one evening with no word, only the ring of keys laid carefully on the desk. By autumn, the Holloway Hotel closed its doors. Officially, the notice blamed decline in travel and economic hardship. Unofficially, townsfolk said the building had grown restless, its halls echoing with sounds that did not belong to men. At winter's first frost, fire consumed the timbers. No one saw who lit it, though many suspected Holloway himself, eager to erase what he could no longer control. When the flames died, only the stone foundation remained, and the well, untouched, unblackened, its stones cool as though fire had bowed around it. Children dared each other to stand near it, but none lingered long. They said the draft carried voices if you listened too close, names whispered in tones that matched the town's missing. In time, the ruins grew moss and briar. The Holloway name was spoken less and less until even the maps forgot. But the well remained, hidden in the hollow, older than the hotel, older than the town. It waits still, a mouth in the earth, patient and unsated.